It's time we answered that age-old question. Does size matter? Oh, come on, YouTube. Does the size of your watch matter? We're gonna talk about what factors you should consider about watch sizes, why some watches wear bigger or smaller than others, and ultimately, why you should or should not care. All right, when it comes to watch sizes, we're gonna talk about 3 points you should consider. Now, make sure you stick around for all 3 points as I'm saving the best for last. First and foremost is choosing the watch that fits your wrist, okay? We're not talking about the wrist you see in a commercial or in those perfectly set up shots on Instagram. We're talking about the watch that fits your personal wrist. But Chris, how do we do that? Well, you do that by considering key specs of the watch, key measurements, because every measurement counts. There are many factors about a watch that change the way a watch wears on your wrist. It goes well beyond the advertised diameter of a watch. Some things to consider are the size of the dial. For example, my 40mm day date and my 40mm Submariner do not appear the same on wrist. One of the reasons is the size of the dial. Now, the day-date dial is much bigger. Therefore, it gives the appearance of a bigger watch on many wrists. It is the reason the 40mm day date wears larger on a lot of individuals. Now, in contrast, the size of the dial that's in the Submariner is the same size dial that's featured in a 36mm Explorer. This design does a better job of breaking up the dial, bezel, and lugs. But in the same example, the lugs are also a huge factor. You can see that the maxi lugs on the Sub give the appearance and feel of a watch closer to a 42mm watch, while the day date has slender lugs that pare the watch down closer to a 39mm watch. It is a design that better wraps around more wrists. Just keep in mind, 40mm isn't always 40mm. Another key measurement that tends to go overlooked is the lug-to-lug or vertical measurement of a watch. In many instances, the lug-to-lug of a watch can make or break a watch. It's the reason some bigger diameter watches wear nicely on a variety of wrists. For example, my newly acquired Rolex Sea Dweller has a nice compact lug-to-lug of about 46.5mm. It's a much more substantial watch, much thicker than a Submariner and the GMT. However, because of the compact lug-to-lug, it balances the thickness of the Sea Dweller, creating the look and feel of a much smaller watch. You look at the lugs and compare them to a Submariner of the same era with those maxi lugs, the slender lugs of the Sea Dweller becomes just another reason it wears a little smaller than a Sea Dweller would normally suggest. It's a little bit of an optical illusion. Now, on the other hand, there are examples of watches I've experienced that on paper have appealing diameters, but become a little unwearable because of the lug-to-lug. A great example of this is the previous generation IWC Mark 18 with its advertised 40mm diameter. Even on my wrist, it was always a tad long up and down. Now, thankfully, the new Mark 20 is pared down to a lug-to-lug of 49mm, which, yes, is a minor change, but ask most people who have experienced both, it's made a world of difference. It's really those refinements that tend to go a long way, and it could be the reason a watch model flops or sells. I personally considered buying the Mark 18 previously. I tried it on many times. I always loved the aesthetic of the watch, the styling, but every time I put it on my wrist, it just didn't do it for me. It looked off. But I did try on the new Mark 20, and those refinements, they make a big difference on wrists. So much so that I think I will eventually add that watch into my collection. Eventually. You see, us watch collectors, we like to obsess about the details. Some may say we're fickle, but I like to say we're passionate. We're detail-oriented. Now, on the opposite end, there are watches on paper that would seem unwearable on most wrists. For example, the Omega Seamaster Pro Prof, a massive deep diving watch that has a case diameter of 55 millimeters and a thickness of 17.6 millimeters. But the lug to lug of this watch is only 48 millimeters. And just recently, the newest release refined it further down to 45 millimeters. It's that key measurement, that lug to lug, that explains why when you look at wrist shots, it kind of works on a wide variety of wrist sizes. So definitely make sure the next time you're shopping for a watch that you know the lug to lug and you take that into consideration for your wrist. Another major factor you absolutely have to consider is the shape of the watch. A circular watch is going to wear much smaller than a square or a rectangular watch. This is the reason the Cartier tank, no matter what its advertised size is, will always wear larger than you'd expect. For example, my Cartier Tank Louis is technically the large size. It has a measurement of 33.7 by 25.5 millimeters. Now, by most people's account, that would be a small watch, and it turns most men off from even considering this watch. But when you look at varying wrist sizes wearing this same watch, you begin to see how much bigger it wears. It absolutely does not wear anything close to a 33 millimeter circular watch. Here you can see my wife's 31 millimeter Datejust next to the Tank Louis for comparison. This illustrates just how important case shape is. We can take it even further and look at the entire line of the tank and all of its sizes. Here I have the small size, which funny enough is more historically correct to the size men used to wear. Men like JFK, Muhammad Ali, men who defined masculinity in their era. Now, I opted for the large tank as personally, I loved how it maintains the tank's proportions and shape, just slightly upsized to create a more modern silhouette. And then we have the XL tank, which is aimed at those who love the styling of the tank, but want something with more presence and daily wearability with its automatic movement. But you can see the XL, even with its 41 by 31 millimeter measurements, wears much larger because it's a rectangular watch, even appearing much larger than similarly sized circular watches. Now, in my opinion, a Cartier tank is to be worn more like a bracelet, so seeing a bit of strap on either side of your wrist is the proper look for the style. So do consider that when you're choosing a size for this style of a watch. One last factor to consider is the dial color. Generally, darker dials will wear smaller than a lighter color dial. It is the trick of the eye that will make a difference. A perfect example of this is the Rolex Explorer 2, comes in a white dial and black dial. This is already a much bigger watch at 42 millimeters, and the reality is that not many wrists can pull it off. And maybe if you're right on the edge of the wrist that can pull it off, maybe that's when you opt for the more slimming black dial. It can make a world of difference. It works in the world of fashion and clothing as well as in the world of watches. All right, so those are some of the factors that I would consider when choosing the watch that fits your personal wrist. Now, the second point I'd like to go over is the genre of the watch, because the genre of the watch could be a great reason to ignore all those other reasons we just talked about. There are many different genres of watches, so we're gonna minimize it into dress and sport, because within dress and sport, there are subcategories of watches. Now, in my opinion, dress watches should generally lean on the modest size. The common saying is that it should fit under a dress cuff. A dress watch is intended for the wearer and the wearer only to tell time discreetly. So within the dress watch genre, a smaller, more modest size is something to consider when shopping for your next dress watch. It is usually when you get into the sports watches that you'll see many contradictions to the rules we defined previously. For example, the IWC Big Pilot. Within the pilot's watch genre, this is the ultimate pilot's watch. Now, if we go by the parameters we set earlier with case shape, diameter, lug to lug, unfortunately, this watch does not fit 95% of people who try this watch on. This 46 millimeter behemoth does not make sense on most wrists, but that's where the genre of the watch could be enough for an individual to ignore all of these factors. It's a pilot's tool watch. It's supposed to be big. I'm gonna rock it for what it is because I love the design, and that is perfectly acceptable. Another subcategory of sporty watches are field watches. Watches like the Rolex Explorer, IWC Mark Series, and the ultimate field watch, the Hamilton Khaki Field, all sort of fit within this subcategory of field watches. And this is where I see many bigger wristed men who just prefer the styling of a 36 to 40 millimeter field watch. They love how it fits, the feel of the watch, the styling, it's modest and unobtrusive. They don't want a flashy watch, and that genre and style of a watch in a smaller size completes the feel for them. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. You know, this whole black and white view, 36 millimeters and below is a woman's size. It's just silly. Some men just love the way a 34 millimeter vintage watch looks, feels on their wrist. I mean, vintage watches it's a genre in itself. Other men love the heft of a modern Submariner. And yeah, maybe it doesn't fit them lug to lug. Maybe it hangs off of either side of their wrist. But you know what? They feel comfortable with that watch. They love dive watches. And a dive watch, it's a whole different category. It's supposed to be bold. It's supposed to be legible and robust. Doesn't make that guy more or less of a man. The watch does not make the man. It's the other way around. The genre of the watch is important to know and understand. Now the last point. It's really the most important point. And that is, does it really matter? Does size really matter? The answer is no. It's the motion in the ocean. There you go. I answered the question. The age-old question is answered. Size does not matter. Kidding. I'm kidding. Does the size of your watch really matter? Because at the end of the day, you can find a watch that lug to lug hangs off of either side of your wrist. It features a bright white dial, has huge pushers, it's thick as hell, and it's technically a dress style watch. None of which makes sense within any of the previous points, but you absolutely love this watch. It's a watch that brings you happiness and joy. It's something you want to wear every day, something you're proud of. If you're comfortable wearing that watch, do it. Don't go on the forums looking for validation, looking for other people to tell you that your watch is cool. At the end of the day, you're the one that has to wear the watch. And why would you ever buy a watch to impress a bunch of guys? Because let's face it, women aren't noticing your chronograph. Buy the watch that makes you happy. Although this is the last point, I think it's the most important point, because when you're looking at spending your hard-earned money, it's really the only question you should be asking yourself. Does this watch make you happy? Hopefully this video helps you maneuver through different watch sizes, shapes, styles. There's a lot you can fixate on in the world of watches. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the answer is no. Size doesn't really matter. Well, most of the time. Negroni out.